start the recording, and
Where is everyone? This is a small
uh,
group.
yeah, it's a small group. People come and go. That's fine. And in the end, they're gonna be on YouTube. The idea is that this becomes a series that people can reference to if they want to, start
Yeah,
working on the repository.
makes total sense actually.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty a nice way to get some, to do the work and to get some high quality content out there, or quality,
Recording going.
sufficient quality.
2.
And there's quite some views, 160 views on a on me talking about code, so that's not bad. So that's pretty decent. All right, so I'm just gonna start. For today's session, we're gonna be doing two different things. First of all, I'm gonna look at an issue that I made for novel people that are new to the repository. I'm just gonna show you how one could approach this issue, and what roughly the idea is on how the test sequence looks like, so how you can test your own work, and how you can finalize the pull request. By all means, I'm not gonna completely finalize the issue because I would like someone else to finalize it, but I'm gonna start off with that, and after that I'm gonna look into something that has a very noticeable impact on the simulation, and that's projectiles. In particular, we're going to optimize one particular projectile in this case, and that is the projectile of the Tech 1 Seraphim artillery that fires in an arc and then splits up in 4 additional projectiles. And we're going to do an actual analysis. Last time we did it through bytecode, the time before we just did it through the benchmarks that we have, but now we're actually going to see a measurable difference in the simulation while we're optimizing it. And I'm going to show you some additional tricks to help smoothen the workflow in case you, for example, make mistakes, which we will do because we're human. So let's start looking into issue 3578. So the idea of this issue is that we have this function here called onMotion horizontal event change, and that function is called every single time a unit changes its the state of its horizontal motion. So for example, it stops, it starts moving, it's on cruise speed, or it's on top speed. And you can imagine that units tend to change between those quite a lot. As an example, let's open up our repository. Let's check out on a new branch. Path develop, git checkout, b approach to onMotion horizontal event change. Beautiful. And as usual, we start by just adding a log statement, and we're just going to see what is the data that we actually have. So self is the unit itself, but what is new and what is old? Now with that said, let's just spawn in a random unit. Right, and here we can already see the first results. So in this short movement of less than 1 second, we've had a, let's see, these are 3 calls. We've had a top speed, a stopped, a cruise from top speed, and then again a top speed and cruise. Let's actually make this slightly more friendly to use. There we go. And old. And then we add a nice little something like that. And as usual, we changed the class, but the instance is still looking at the old class. So we respawn the unit. And there we go. And there we go. So we've got top speed cruise, top speed cruise, top speed cruise. As you can imagine, this gets called quite a lot. Let's say we have a bunch of additional tanks. Oh, I am streaming, right? This time? Yes.
You are.
And I am recording too? Yes. This is a good start. All right, let's do 25 of these. And this is a trick I learned from Dragon. So this is just of 25 units that continuously spam this function. Right, so this function is what we would call critical code or hot code or whatever term you'd like to use for it, but it's called very, very, very often during game, which means that anything that is redundant in here is a quick win, right? That's low-hanging fruit. And when we look at the function, there's going to be a few easy to tackle issues. As an example, this function is part of the generic unit class. This is the class that every unit inherits from. So if we go to default units, then you'll see that every one of these units inherits these classes. They somehow inherit again from the unit class, which means that all units I lost my function. Motion horizontal event change, which means that all units run this code. But we have ambient sounds and unit sounds, and we've got checking on weapon capabilities, but moreover, we've got here stopping the unit ambient sound, ambient move stop, ambient move water, ambient move land. There's not one single unit in the game that will have an ambient sound that is both land and sub and water. Right, so in this case, this function is too generic. And it wouldn't be too big of an issue if this function wasn't called so often. Right, we've got all these tanks. Let's just run them again. There we go. It gets called a lot. So that's one of the first things we're going to do. We see this ambient move land, move sub, and move water, while at the same time we have a, I think it was called a naval unit. No. Water unit. Oh, here we go, a sub unit. Right, so we could just add this ambient move sub that we have here twice. We could just add that to the subunit class. I've got an area unit here. We don't have an air move, but we do have here, oh wait, that's the vertical one, that's different. No, there's no aerial movements. There should be a naval unit, a walking land unit, a mobile unit, wall structure unit, water on impact, yeah. Sea unit, of course. Which by all means would probably use these ambient move water that we see here. And we have hover units, these hoverland units. Right, and these hoverland units would be the perfect candidate for a unit that would actually use ambient move water and use ambient move land, depending on the layer that we are on right now. So let's start doing that. Let's get rid of these units and let's get ourselves a map that has water. Perfect. My computer is a bit laggy. All right. So we got ourselves a water map. Let's see what we have. We've got ambient move sub, land, and water. If we read the issue that we're working on, which is this one, refactor the function to the base classes and default units.lua. In particular, bits and pieces of code should move to these classes right here. Note that not all of these require the logic. You need to figure out what fits where best. You can test this with spawning in new units and moving them around. Make sure to add logs to it and keep them in the pull request until after it has been reviewed. Alright, and I'll feel free to ask questions. Take one bit at a time. Carefully examine what codes need to be regeneric. Alright. Sounds good enough. So let's start with a simple test. We're going to need a unit that actually has this ambient move land sound, which is not that many, surprisingly. What unit is this? Blink UL. Ironically. Follow you. UEL 040 factory. Okay, fair enough. I'm not sure if you can hear this on stream, but it has a very clear factory type of sound. Whoa. I wonder if people actually know this makes a sound. Can you hear it?
I never knew.
Can you hear it on stream?
No.
Okay. Well, apparently this makes a very whoosh type of sound, and this one makes a, like you would expect from a factory type of sound. Okay. So there we know. We've got 2 units to test this with. What is this one? That's fine. Let's see if we have any of these. These are more common. We've got UES 0203, which is an attack submarine. Yeah, that's kind of what you would expect from a naval unit. And we've got this move water, which is again this hovercraft, right? That's the UAL 0203. Again, the Fat Boy 2. And let's get that one in. XSL 0203. Up another hover tank. Okay, this is interesting. One could argue that we could almost just remove this one altogether. Ambient move is quite common, however. Oh, what unit was this? Riptide. Amphibious tank, Riptide, UEL 0203. It has a regular ambient move too. Is this the right unit? Yeah. Okay, so I think what happens here is that these are only used by hover units. This one is only used by subs, as you would expect. Because I was actually expecting this one to be used by boats and stuff like that. Do they actually have ambient sounds? US 0103. An ambient move. Okay, so apparently these are only used for hover units to make a distinction, whereas this one is very clear. That's a sub. I wonder if a sub has a regular movement then, just to make sure that we know what we're dealing with. Whoops. It has a regular one too. Okay. Oh, and if it's on the sub layer, okay. All right. Okay. So let's do this. We have in here in default units some classes. In particular, we've got this hoverland unit class. And we're going to override this function. New old. And what we're doing here is when we make a class, then the first argument is the base. So we're inheriting everything from mobile unit in this case. And the second argument is the specifications of the class that we want to change. So in this case, we want to take everything from mobile unit, and mobile unit in turn takes everything from, where are you?
Unit.
From unit, exactly. So what we're doing here is just changing this one single function. And when we do this, it's always important to call the base first. So we call the base like so. And the reason for that is quite simple. In languages such as C# and everything, you're typically expected to call the base first. For example, with constructors, it's you actually have to call the base. And in this case, we're doing the same thing because there could be some logic initialized in here that we need down the road. Now, on this particular function, that's not very likely, but there are many occasions in the base code where the onCreate function, which does a lot of initialization, is switched around. And that actually caused a few issues last year. So I have to fix that again. But in this case, if we are a mobile unit, and we are stopping or we stopped, this seems one and the same to me. If we are stopping, then at some point we're never going to stop without stopping first. So I'd say we could just do this, but that may be just me, right? Because if we're stopping, then stopped is next. And then we're just going to stop these. And similarly, if old is stopped, if new is stopping, let's just go for stopped. If old is stopped or old is stopping and new is cruise, or new is top speed, this seems very convoluted for what we're trying to do. Or old is stopping and new is cruise. In what scenario would you have that? Old stopped, old stopping. I think we can simplify this by just saying if we stopped before, then we want to play the sound accordingly. So in this case, layer is from self.layer. So if we are on water, if self.layer this is water, then else if ends. Self.layer this is land. So if we're on water, then we want to do the water sound. And otherwise, we'd like to do the land sound. Or seabed. That's relevant. All right. And that means that from this point onwards, we can remove this check. Which is very convoluted. If we're in water, or if we're in seabed, and which means that if this is true, then we do this, and this function returns true if it succeeds, and otherwise it returns false. Okay, this is a bit convoluted, but I think what this means is that if this is true, and we have a sound called ambient move water, then we can end here. But if we don't have, but if this is true and we don't have that sound, then we try this next one. But if the layer is water, then the layer is never going to be sub. Right? So if the first one, if this succeeds and that one doesn't, then all the other checks here are not going to succeed either. Because then the layer is water already. Okay. That one's a bit weird, but we can simplify this now to just this. And we can remove these here too. Let's see. We're calling the base. If we stopped before, but we're doing something else now, then we make a sound. If we did something else, but now we've stopped, then we stop the sound.
I think you have left a trailing or in that statement you deleted before.
Uh-oh. You're right. If not... Yeah, that statement here was pretty weird.
Yeah.
If not, then let's stick. Okay.
That's much more readable.
Well, it's still a bit convoluted because so in Lua, just so that we're all on the same page, what happens in Lua with the or and the and statements, it's called short circuiting, I think.
Yeah, it only runs the second.
Yeah.
If like
yeah.
Well, if with an and, it's only going to run the second if the first succeeds.
Yeah.
And with an or, it's only going to run the second if the first fails.
Yeah, but more importantly, it returns the last true v value it found. So if A here is true, then this statement returns A. If B here is true, then this statement returns B. And the same thing for AND. If A is true, in this case, if A is true, it will always return A. And if A is false, it will try and return B. And in this case, if A is true, it will return B. Which means that what we're doing here...
What do you mean by return B?
Well, what you can do is something like this. Return true and 2.
That's going to evaluate to 5?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think that's what they were doing here, sort of. But the problem with this syntax is that it's,
How does that even make sense in the context of that conditional, though? It's just ignored, like it's just that little fact, I guess.
Yeah. Let me check this real quick before I continue.
I guess my point is like 5 is still technically true as far as the conditional is concerned. But if you were to assign something to that result, you'd get the second
Yeah.
side of the and. Is that what you're saying here? Like as the result?
Yeah, let me check this real quick.
That's whack. That's really crazy. Okay.
Oops. Yeah, there's bracket too much there. Let's see, it returns 5.
That's crazy. I
Right.
would have assumed it would just give true.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But it allows you to write really strange code, which is not very maintainable.
Yeah. I don't know of any language that does that, except this now, I guess.
Yeah, well, welcome to Lua. Anyway, so we've got the factory, this little fella, experimental factory, no, mobile factory, yes. And just to confirm real quick, right, so you can't hear it, I suspect, but it still makes a sound. So that means that even though this is not a hoverland unit, which is pretty weird, I think. Does this? I am a hoverland. Does that trigger? I'd expect it to be amphibious. No, doesn't trigger, right? So that means that we're hearing the default ambient move. Slow hoverland unit, slow amphibious unit. Oh, there it is. What is the mobile factory? UEL001. Let's look at the script. We've got a T mobile factory unit. Terran units, which is a land unit apparently. Well, and a land unit, I suspect, is not a hover unit. Which means that we're essentially removing this sound from.
Well, the fat boy doesn't hover; it goes across the bottom.
True, but it's not. I would have expected it to be an amphibious unit, right? Because it can do this and not drown. But apparently
This does have an amphibious tag in the blueprints.
Yeah, so we would expect this here to be amphibious. Let's see, amphibious. So, you know, the in this case, the class is empty anyway. There we go. Problem solved. And we were working in this fella. So we're just gonna copy this. There we go. I am a whoops. Access to non-existent global faraway amphibious land unit. Terran. That means that we don't have this one imported. This. There we go. Doesn't make a sound. Makes a sound here though.
I mean, it makes sense to not hit sound underwater.
You'd be surprised. There's a pull request that specifically fixed the issue of units not making sounds in the water. Even though I would agree with you that, for example, submarines.
Yeah.
Why do they make sound? Because we can't hear them between quotation marks. But you know what's realism? We're doing a game here. But this is roughly the idea of the pull request. I'm gonna clean this up slightly. I think we can simplify this one here too. If we stopped Then we do this. If new is stopped or new is stopped, right? So if we stopped moving, then we want to do the stop move sound. If we completely stopped, then we want to remove these. Now we can simplify this. And for those wondering, wait, can you just do this? Doesn't this change the game or maybe negatively impact the game in some sense? And the answer is yes. We are changing how the sound works right now. There's going to be scenarios where it wouldn't play, even though it did before. But given that this is very hot code, right, in terms of the how often it's called, I think keeping it very simple is very relevant here. And that's what I'm going to be talking about for this pull request. There's more in here that we could do. For example, one could move this ambient move sub sound towards the subunit. That will remove this one here too. And if one would dive even deeper, then there we go. One could go even further. For example, we've got this function. And this one is quite a disaster. So what happens is, let's take a security finder for simplicity, that we have movement effects. A very simple example, oops, is the trail of the ASF, but in particular these glider thingies of the tips of the wing, right? That little outer edge that only runs when the ASF is at max speed. Those are called contrails. And that's what this code here does. It's just that every time the movement changes, those effects are created and destroyed, etc. accordingly, depending on the new and old state. So one could definitely argue that there is something to gain here by either caching things or by at least not recreating the table. Because if we dive even deeper, then this one calls the clean up effect back. And if we look at that one, clean up, then what happens is we're not sending the bag itself, but we're sending a name, right? We're sending the name of the bag, which is pretty, that's a bit weird, but okay. Then we loop over all the values in that bag. We destroy that value, and then we return a new table, which means that every single time an ASF moves, right? So if we have a bunch of ASF, let's make 300 of them. This is not an unusual number by all means, right? There can be games where there's 2 or more people with 300 ASF. Every single time, the contrails, which is these little fellas, right? Those straight lines are created and destroyed again. A new table is allocated, right? Whereas we could just reuse the table. And those are all types of small little performance gains that we can do, in particular because if you reuse a table, it's very friendly to the cache, but if you constantly allocate new tables, then that's not very friendly for your cache because it has to get it back into the cache, etc., and evict something else, etc. But that's not something for this session. I hope at some point that someone else picks up that particular part, because this is a place where we can make a nice difference. But with that said, I'm gonna do a git stage, git commit, move the water/land sounds into previous units. Water class. Set stream origin approach to, okay, here we go, on motion horizontal event change. There we go. All right. Closest. 3687? No. 3578. Okay, close enough. All right. That as an exercise. To do add YouTube link. Create pull request. All right. But this is a very small change that we're making, but considering that this code is run very, 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 very often, any change that we make here is relevant, right? It's just called a critical path, hot path. I should have looked up that term before I started this session.
Can you just do a quick recap of what you've actually changed here?
No, I'm not changing the video. That's way too much effort. But with that said, let's take a 5-minute break before we continue on and look at projectiles. And that allows me to set up this scenario that we will use to test them. So I'm gonna